Welcome to RV Woodworks. My name is Rahim, and in this video, I'm going to unbox and set up the newest toy in my shop.
What are you doing? You know she's going to be watching this video. You're never going to get that track saw like this. Come on, Rahim.
Okay, this is not a toy. This is a necessity in my shop. At any rate, a miter gauge is an essential tool for anyone using their table saw, their router, their bandsaw, anything that has a miter gauge on it. And this particular gauge is what I've been using since I purchased my table saw. It's a decent gauge, it's not bad, but there's no proper stops on the curve, on the angles, and every time I set this up, I usually end up having to do some level of correction and ensure I get the right angles. And when you compound those together, then at that point you have a pretty big gap in your project. At any rate, Incra is a great company. This is not a sponsored video. I paid for this with my own money. And I had three options. I had the V27, which is the cheapest of them all. There's the 1000 SE and there's a 1000 HD. Now, the SE stands for Special Edition. And between the V27 and the SE, you get this aluminum bar as well as a stop block. So that makes a huge difference. But going from the SE to the HD, the increments on the interlocking goes from 5-degree increments in the SE to every 1 degree in the HD. So there wasn't that much of a price difference between the SE and the 1000 HD, and I just went ahead for the HD. So that's enough talking. Let's roll that intro and we'll get right into it. Let's go ahead and get right into it and see what we get in the box first. So immediately we're presented with the owner's manual, 3 packets. Looks like they have some different screws and nylon expansion discs, as well as an Allen key driver. Here is the stop block. Feels very hefty, very nice. I have seen videos where this piece comes off in the middle. Let's give it a shot actually. And this becomes 2 separate blocks now instead of it being just one. Very cool. See that in a bit more detail in a bit. And here's the star of the show, the miter gauge. You also get this tape, which is used if you want to swap the side to the other side, but we'll get to that once we get there. So we'll put the box away. All right, let's get right into it. So for packaging purposes, this bolt here is what's going to be removed and replaced with the handle. Some good quality plastic, guys. That's not coming off that easily. Okay, so this is what's going to go here. With that said, loosen up this one here, and now the miter gauge starts to move. Wow. I'll tell you guys, this is hefty and seems very, very, very sturdy. Wow, this has got some lift to it. Now, above and beyond this, we got these 3 packets as well. And each of these packets, so these nylon expansion pieces, I'll show you where they go here in a second. Let's start with those first. They actually are replacements for these. And there's one more back here which we have to turn this thing around to get to. So this is supposed to fit in basically any table saw that you have. And these expansion slots will allow it to fit into the gauge, and I'll show you that here in a second, without having any movement, which obviously ends up creating the gap that I was talking about earlier and the problems that you have with your cuts. Another packet that we get provides the rear block. Now, this is very important if you're going to use it on the table saw. Some router tables and other tables also have it, but when you have a T-slot or slot in your table saw, on the bottom there's a groove, and this item here will actually fit in that groove so that this is not moving up and down as you push the piece of wood through. So we're going to go ahead and install this here. I don't know why there was an Allen key with this, but that's okay. We have one available right here. Okay, so now at this point, this is a pretty simple, easy setup. Only thing left to do is to add the stop block, which we'll do here. These grooves, and I don't know if you can tell, I mentioned this in the intro or earlier as well, but these have little grooves on them. And these grooves match the grooves, or the opposing grooves, on the aluminum fence. And what this does is that this gives you, even if you don't really have this locked properly, this is not moving. Obviously when you have it locked down, it makes a huge difference. And I did wonder why they put nylon screws back here, knowing that this is an important piece that shouldn't move, and this nylon nuts are kind of disposable at some point, but you don't really need to tighten these down that much. And the reason is the grooves on this side. So it's very hefty, very strong, and as you're cutting, you can have two positive stops. So if you're in production, if you're doing production work, then one length can be here and the other length can be here. Now, it does come with these additional pieces, smaller pieces here, but you might be thinking to yourself, well, what if the distance is not exactly this and you need it to be something else? Well, these smaller pieces can fit in here, but what you do is, let's say you want this piece to be, why is it so difficult for me? There we go. Well, whatever distance this is, well, if you want this piece to be here, so then you can lock this down here, and that way you have both of them down. You have one piece of wood that ends here, and then you lift this up and the other one will end here instead of it going all the way to the end. Very interesting thought. You know, when they put this miter gauge together, I feel like they thought of everything. Something else that I'll show you here is on the back. You can actually increment this at half a degree, up to a half a degree change. Although you have all these 180 stops all the way, you can actually change this to be off by a half a degree, up to a half a degree. So there's actually a lot more positive stops than even the individual degrees that I was talking about. But this is an incredible, very versatile miter gauge that is absolutely amazing. Let me pause here. I'll set up the table saw, and then I'll show you how we're going to set up to make sure this is parallel to the T-slot. Alright guys, we are now at my table saw. It is a rigid table saw, 4520, great cabinet style hybrid work saw. Table saw. And shameless personal promo. If you haven't seen the video how I turn my table saw top into a workbench, I encourage you to check that out. I'll put a link in the video description up on the left. But just to go back to show you this piece, instead of it just falling in, it goes into this groove. And that way now when I try to lift it up, because the table saw is running inward, it's not going to cause this to lift up under any circumstance. Now what we need to do is we need to get rid of this noise. This is the piece that creates a difference in the angle, no matter you think or not, but this little change right here will actually prevent you to have a good solid project. In order to do that, we need to tighten up these or loosen them depending on what your situation is, and there's one actually under here that we need to get to as well. But that's how we set this up. So let me start off by just taking this off. Well, let's see if we can do it without taking it off. I have not done this in advance, so I don't know. Yeah, we can't get to the one underneath. There's one, I believe there's one right here. If we just look on the bottom, yeah, see? So these right here are underneath, so we need to somehow get this thing to turn all the way around. And in order to do that, what's getting in the way here is this piece. So let's try to get rid of this. Let's take this piece off. There we go. There's nothing loosey-goosey about this miter gauge. Everything is absolutely premium quality, and you can clearly tell when you're putting things together and taking them apart. Just even look at the screw quality. Look at that. Absolutely amazing. Alright, so let's start here. So now it's going to sound counterintuitive, but I want to add this back for just 1 second because I do want to be able to shake it and see if it is making that noise. And then they also provide this Allen key, so let's start to tighten this thing up. So there's 3 of these that face left and 3 of these that face right. So I'm going to do the left ones first, and then we'll come back around to see what we need to do. Okay, so let's start with the right now. That's helped a lot, but I think we need to get behind on that one now. Okay, so let's start turning this thing. I'm going to have to take this off as well. Yes, I will. Okay. Huh? Well, that's interesting. I still can't access it. Okay. Well, that means that I want to have to take this fence off. And in order to take the fence off, so you have to loosen these. And this should slide right off. There we go. There they are. Right here. So now let's start to tighten these down. This should be a one-time activity, right? Because once you have this thing set up in your miter slot, you shouldn't have to continuously change it. So I'm still feeling a little bit of a flex there. now I'm going to hold these down and I'm going to shake this, and you'll see there is zero movement of that T-slot left and right. That's exactly how you want it. Even the movement front and back is very smooth. I did tighten this one a bit too much, but then I loosened it back up again, and we are all good. It's time to reassemble this thing. Alright, so actually before we get there, I just want to mention that I was fortunate enough where these nylon expansion discs, they do fit in my slot, but if they don't, they actually give you all different kinds of discs, as well as an extra screw just in case if you lose one, that you can pretty much make it fit to any saw you want. But let's go ahead and put this back together. So I should show you this. There's T-slots in the back here and on the front, so you can actually add a sacrificial fence to this as well. But we're not going to do that just in this video. If I ever need a sacrificial fence, then I'll add it, and I'll make sure to add a video about it. So I'm not going to tighten this up too much right now because I need to loosen it back up again here in a second. The next step, once this is completed, is to make sure this miter gauge is 90 degrees to my table saw. So let me just put this back together, and we'll do that next. All right, we have this bad boy back together again. We're going to add the handle back. And now, as you remember, I mentioned that I just left the fence a little bit loose. But one of the key things that I like about this miter gauge is that with these two screws, you are able to move this fence one direction or the other in order to get this thing to be square with your table saw. So let's see if I need to make any adjustments. I just raise my blade up here. And we're not turning on the saw, and the saw is actually unplugged right now. And that is the way you want it, because you are going to be pretty close to that blade. You want to create the zero clearance for your miter gauge to the blade, and you don't want anything to mistakenly turn on. So safety alert, do not have the saw plugged in right now when you do this. Okay guys, I'll just turn you guys around here a little bit to make sure that you're able to see properly on what I'm doing. So I've raised this blade up at basically the level of the saw, and I'm going to unscrew both of these. Now, I don't know if it's a benefit, if it's a feature, or if it's a flaw, but you need to keep this thing close to your table saw. When you create a zero clearance on this miter gauge, if you ever need to cut a bevel, to cut a certain angle, what will happen, and you'll see what happens here, is you're going to hit that blade. You see that? You're going to hit that blade. So if you need to cut, let's say, a 45-degree angle, you set up your stop at 45 degrees. Well, you're going to have to change the distance of your fence, or else you're going to end up running into your blade. And therefore, it is important that you hang on to, I guess that's why they give it to you in the package as well, because without this, you're not able to do it. Now, I don't know if people talk about this in other videos or not, but let's say I got this at a 45. Well, guess what? I can't actually screw it in until I take the handle off. Now, I can put the handle back on, and we are ready to go. So, I don't know if I want to call it a flaw, but they got some genius people working on this stuff. Amazing product. I think these little things is really what takes things to the next level. But now you can see I am no longer hitting the table saw when I turn. Anyhow, that was just a quick demo. What we actually need to do is ensure that we are at 90. We're going to set the miter gauge at 0, lock in the handle, and next, my personal recommendation would be to take the longest square that you have and set this to here on this edge, and then I'll bring you guys to the other side that you guys can see this. And what we need to do here is to line up the straight edge to either the blade or this, and then make sure this is absolutely straight. And amazingly enough, I want to pick up the camera and I want to show you this thing is absolutely square out of the gate, out of the box. Absolutely square. That's amazing. But if for some reason this was not square, then at this point I would loosen these two bolts that I talked about here a second ago. Let me just take it out and show you. These two bolts right here. You would loosen these up and you would pivot this thing one direction or the other, and that's how you would get it to be square. I can't think of what else is left to do. I will put this here. I'm not going to actually use this. I'll bring this up close so you can see it. Is it focused? These are the stop block items that I was mentioning earlier that you put here instead. And looks like they've also given you some T-slot screws and bolts, etc. And we talked about the nylon expansion slots. We used the other one, which was for the Frontier. And then finally, which I haven't opened yet, but we also have the owner's manual. Let's take a look at what we got in here. So I'll go through this in a bit more detail, but I'll put it up here for you guys to see if you want. Really great quality. Honestly, I actually don't expect anything less from Incra. If you guys want any of the instructions there, I'll just hold them for a second each. Feel free to pause and take a screenshot if you need it. Very clear instructions here. Nice colored drawings as well. So as I was mentioning earlier, this is a sacrificial fence that you're able to add to this saw, and it actually gives you instructions on how to add it. Also, this is really awesome. It's really cool. They have these little tips sections in the middle as well. And the last page, we're looking at some adjustments here. Alongside that, there's some cursor addendums here. If you want a screenshot of that. And finally, online warranty registration. Alright, I'll be doing that when I finish. But look at that, it's talking about those vinyl and nylon expansion slots that we were working with earlier. Okay, well, that'll do it from here. Alright guys, I haven't done anything else to the miter gauge. We're about to run a test piece. I figured you should be a part of that first cut. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is that if you unlock one of these screws back here, this miter gauge extends all the way out to 31 inches. If you take it to its full extent and tighten that back down, it gives you a full capacity. Actually, I've got 31 and a half here, but the box said 31. So maybe it's because there's a tilt on this or something. No, 31 and a half. There you go. So without further ado, let's make the first cut together. I'm just taking this piece of plywood here, and I want to cut it down to 7 inches. Just turn on the Do you remember that I told you that the table saw is unplugged? Well, it still is. Alright, let's give it another whirl. Now, I haven't cut the most amount of cross cuts in my life, but I will tell you that was a pleasure to cut as compared to the other miter gauge that I have. Let's just talk about a couple of real quick safety things. Here's how I look at my world of crosscuts. If you're ever cutting a board that is wider than it is long, you want to crosscut that. Whenever the board is wider than it is long, when you push that board through, it's going to want to move, and you don't have the length on it to keep it against the fence. That's my first safety tip. I learned that from Stumpy Nubs, and I'll put the video link in the description below. You should watch his channel. He's amazing when it comes to woodworking. Alright, so the other rule that I live by is that when I have my fence on, I will never cut a through cut, which means when I did this cut, I completely cut this piece of wood off, and therefore I will never cut a piece of wood all the way through with the fence right here. I understand that you might want to measure this side and get the measurements for here, and that's why you bring this here to the fence on this side and then push it up against the fence and want to push it through. But what that does is, as you're pushing this wood through and this separates, there's nothing helping this piece of wood go all the way to the end. You notice that when I made my cut, that it just stopped here. In the meantime, while it's stopping here, before you turn the blade off, if this piece catches on that fence and hits that blade, that is called a kickback. It is not just bad, it could be deadly. depending on the piece of wood. It will fire back off at you at tremendous speeds, and it will harm you. So these are the two rules that I live by when I do work on my crosscut, and I figured I'd share those with you as well to keep you safe in the shop. Well, that about does it for this video. My initial thoughts are this thing is an amazing piece of machinery. I cannot wait to use it on my projects, and make sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you'll see me use this as well as other tools while I'm building projects. I think that's all we got for this one. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.